Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're just going to be looking at two problems, both of medium difficulty, so I hope that you enjoy them.
So here's the first puzzle that we'll look at. It's white's move. It's a little trickier than it seems at first, but it's not too hard, so feel free to solve it if you would like. Alright, let's look at the solution. The first thing to note is that white is down a rook, and also that both his king and black's king are in pretty bad positions, but it's white's turn. If white tries a check like queen b2 check, then after f6, black is the one checkmating white. Next thing to note is that knight takes f7 would be checkmate, if not for queen takes f7. So white might try to distract the queen away from the defense of the pawn by queen c5. Of course, takes would be checkmate, but black has queen f6 checkmate, so queen c5 doesn't work. And in particular, we need to control the f6 square. So then by process of elimination, we come to the only real candidate move, queen d8. And this is indeed the first move. Now we see that if black tries something like queen a7, trying to hold on to the f7 pawn, then queen f6 is going to be checkmate. So black could try, for example, knight g6, trying to support the queen, but we can still just take, and if they recapture, knight f7 is checkmate. Black could try rook g6 check, in order to make space for the king, so that now knight f7 is not checkmate, but we have this fork, so after king g8, we just take the queen, with two extra pawns in the endgame in a winning position. So knight d4 is probably the best try for black. Knight d4 is a funny move because white just put their queen undefended to attack black's queen, and now black makes a move which doesn't directly defend their own queen. But queen takes e7 would just run into knight f5 checkmate, also with the fork. So what does white do? Queen d4 would just run into f6 followed by queen g7 again. So then we see that white needs to control the f5 square. White has two ways to defend the f5 square, knight e3 and knight g3. And on the surface, knight g3 seems more natural because knight e3 puts the knight on pre. But actually it's the correct move. Let's briefly see why knight g3 doesn't work because it's far from obvious. After knight g3, black can actually make a fortress by sacking the queen. Queen e6 check. Knight takes e6, and now knight f takes e6. And the main point is that the knight on g3 is hanging, and this ends up being a problem in a few lines. Queen f6 check, what else? Rook g7, and now white has two possibilities, which I'll go through very quickly. The first line to look at is f5, hitting the knight, but after king g8, black just sacrifices the knight back, but ends up getting a draw. Takes, knight recaptures, and now rook h7 checkmate is a threat, but also taking the knight is a threat. And white just can't stop both. For example, queen f5, just rook takes g3, and the king is just stuck here forever. Black can just wait around all day. White could also try knight f5. And after takes, it seems like white should just win this in the long run with the queen and pawn for knight and rook. But again, it just turns out white's king is stuck here on h6. For example, after king g8, there isn't really much that white can do. Black can always just go knight f8 e6, maybe king h8 g8, or move the rook around on the g file. And if white tries to push the f pawn, for example, queen c2, knight f8, f5, then after f6, black is the one threatening checkmate, and white has to bail out with a stalemate trick like queen g2, rook g2 stalemate. So all of this was just to show that knight e3 is the only correct move, defending f5 this way. And it's funny that you put the knight on pre in order to defend it. And now black really doesn't have anything. The threat of queen e7 is really big now, and queen e6 doesn't work. Just knight takes e6, whichever way they take. Now we could just go queen e7. Hitting the f7 pawn, queen f6 is a threat. The knight could come to d5. This is just a winning position for white. Let's take a look at this puzzle. It's white to move. There's definitely a lot going on, but I would encourage you to give this one a try. Things to note about this position are that white is down a bunch of material, and Black's king is in a really bad position on this long diagonal. A natural move to consider is queen takes g3, with the point takes, then bishop takes h3, and bishop g2 is a gigantic threat. But this is a mistake because black just takes on e6 first and then takes the queen. Turns out that the only winning move is queen takes h3. Now bishop g2 or queen g3 followed by bishop g2 are really big threats, so rook takes h3 is forced. Bishop takes h3, and now bishop g2 is a threat. And it seems like black just loses, for example, f3, just knight c7, and king c7, followed by bishop g4 and mate on the long diagonal. But black has a cunning trick, g4. Now bishop g2 would run into f3, so bishop g4 is forced, and knight d6. And this is the critical moment of the composition. Here, the first move to come to the minds of most players is probably bishop f3 check, but this is actually a mistake. Let's see why. Knight b7, black has to play. And the first point is knight takes c7, queen c7, king c7. Looks like white's just completely dominating, but actually this is stalemate. So instead, after bishop f3, knight b7, white could try to play a b7, queen b7, and now knight c7 check. King b8 and take the queen, and it looks like white's just up a piece. But actually, if we look at this more closely, black has 3 pawns for the piece, and this pawn is really fast. The a pawn is going to get traded. This actually ends up being a draw, and I left a long, fairly forced line in the study if you want to check that. So surprisingly, it turns out that bishop f3 check is a draw. So white plays knight c7 check. Queen takes, king takes, and now we have an endgame where black is up a few pawns, but their king is in a really bad situation. Knight e8 check is basically forced, and now king c8, a clever king maneuver. King d8 does not work. For example, knight f6, bishop f3 check, king b8, king e7, and now even knight takes h5 ends up being a draw. This position is a theoretical draw with the pawns like this because black can just shuffle their king forever. King c8 instead is the only move. So after king c8, knight d6 check, king d7, white just wins the knight because knight f7, king c7, the king just returns home, and bishop f3 is going to be checkmate. For example, knight g5, bishop d7, and bishop c6 is coming. After white wins the knight, it's going to be an easy win because unlike in the king d8 variation, now we still have our pawn on h5, so white can just win these pawns and push his h-pawn. So in this puzzle, we saw white gives up their queen and is temporarily down even more than a queen, but bishop g2 is a strong threat. Black creates stalemate tricks, and the big point is that bishop f3 somehow ends up being a draw for black. So knight c7, and then we do this little king dance in order to avoid tricky knight checks and end up mating on the long diagonal.
So that was the video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you would like to see more of my videos, please subscribe. And if you want to check out my recent video, you can click here. Thanks so much. Bye.